Recently, I joked to someone that I referred to myself jokingly as having been actively involved in education in Jackson-Madison County for almost 100 years. Well, that's really much closer to the truth than I'd really like to admit, considering that I started to school at Bemis Elementary when I was 5 years old, moved to Melissa's in 4th grade, then to Southside's brand new building in the 10th grade. I was a student at Union for 3 years, and the 3rd year that I was there, I student taught at Southside, and then was hired to teach at Northside in May prior to my graduation from Union in August. In the meantime, my 3 siblings attended Melissa's and Southside, so I was actively involved in their activities. When I was interviewed for my position on the school board, I told them that, like the State Farm commercial says, I've seen it all. For I've started teaching during segregation, participated in desegregation, moved on to consolidation, then to administration, and finally to higher education. So I've done all the shuns. My educational journey as a teacher has taken me to Northside, to East High and Elementary, to West Senior High, back to Northside, to the central office, and to Union, where I still am. So as I talk, you don't have to watch me, watch the screen, because David's going to be advancing, and we couldn't fill up the screen up there with the pictures because it just won't work right. But watch the pictures, and they're in no certain order, they're just mixed up. Present schools, old schools, schools that are no longer there, and we can come back and talk about those if you have any questions. But they're just some interesting pictures, and you'll see some interesting faces up there too. But education has always been a priority for Jackson-Madison County, as evidenced by the early settlers seeking educational opportunities for their children upon arrival to the area. According to tradition, a log schoolhouse was built northwest of Jackson in 1822, and 1822 is the birth date of Madison County. The Jackson Male Academy opened in February 1823, and the Jackson Female Academy was in operation in 1824. Private male and female academies opened in communities some distance from the city, and 2 of those were Denmark and Spring Creek. And you'll see a picture of the Spring Creek School on the screen. Education, it seems, was only available for the best families, those who could afford either the private academies or the subscription schools common in rural areas where kids had to pay a small amount to attend school. Madison County Public Schools began their struggle for existence in 1839 with the state legislature's bill in 1838 to establish a state bank in the amount of $100,000 annually for the support of public education, and that was all across the state. Madison County received $2,176.66 for its population of 3,184 students. Despite the scarcity of funds, District 1 built a new school for $15. About 40 schools were in existence in 1841, but around the turn of the century, there were almost 100 schools in Madison County. In the 1840s, school terms were 5 months long, from February through June. A few were reported to be only 3 months long. One was 12 months in District 1, and that was probably the brand new well-to-do school built for $15. Now, some of you have probably seen on the news that we're in the process of talking about a new school for Pope, $48 million. But don't you imagine those people who moved into the $15 school were thrilled to death? It was not until 1873 when the new public school law passed that the poor schools were abolished and schools were declared free to all persons between 6 and 21 years of age. Thus, the Madison County school system was formed with B.J. Campbell as superintendent. The Jackson school system was formed with J.C. Brooke as superintendent. The city schools reported 457 students during his tenure. During that same time, according to my good friend Virginia Conger, a teacher's salary was $36 a month. 9 teachers and 457 students attended school for 5 hours a day, and only single women were hired in the elementary school. Students were taught mainly reading, math, and grammar. They were not allowed to draw pictures in school, for drawing was considered naughty. Also, smiling as pictures was considered silly. Now you're going to see, in the pictures, you're going to see a picture of the school board in 1910, and they're all very stern looking. Then following that, you see a picture of the present school board, and some of them are smiling. I'm not. I'm not silly. At the same time that the city teachers were making $36 a month, county teachers made between $20 to $30 a month, depending on the size and location of the school. Historically, Jackson City teachers made more than Madison County teachers, and that was until consolidation in 1992-93. Now, I just happen to have my pay stub from the first year that I taught. They're handwritten, the checks were handwritten. And so my monthly salary was $307.50. And out of that, they took $44.86 for some kind of tax, Social Security $9.61, and retirement $9.23. And then 1 month they took out $21 for dues, and so my check was $222.86. But the other months it was $243.86, and that comes to just over $3,000 a year. And I remember the first time that I made $10,000 a year was after I was teaching at West High School, and I went there in 1970, so it was sometime after that. And the rumor was across the school system that people who worked in the central office made $10,000 a year, and we just were in awe of those people who made that much money. And so when I reached 10,000, I thought I had really arrived. 3 of Jackson-Madison County's colleges had their beginning in the mid to late 1800s. Madison Mill Academy, formed in 1834, became Southwestern Baptist University, and then later Union University. And Union's celebrating its 200th year next year. The Memphis Conference Female Institute began in 1840 and was chartered as Lambeth College in 1924. The Colored Methodist High School opened in 1882 and became Lane College around 1895. In 1967, Jackson State Community College joined the ranks of higher education in Jackson-Madison County. And I spent a few years moonlighting at Jackson State to supplement my probably maybe $5,000 salary at that time. And so I have a connection with them as well. The color of one's skin stood at the forefront of school systems during the 1950s and 60s. A note of interest is that 5 black schools were built in 1959 to 1960 to consolidate small schools. So when the schools consolidated, the Jackson and Madison County schools consolidated in 92-93, that was nothing new because consolidation had gone on before. Greer School, out in the Denmark community, was made up of 6 small schools, so 6 schools closed to become Greer School. Denmark made up of 5, Span Rosenwald 5, and you'll see a picture of Span Rosenwald on the screen. Tri-Community out in the east part of the county, 3 schools, and East, which is east, out in the east part, 3 schools. After several lawsuits were filed to integrate schools, the end of racial segregation began with Tigard Junior High School in 1962 with a quiet integration. On January 25, 1964, a more publicized integration took place when Brenda Monroe Moses entered Jackson High School as the first African-American student. In 1970, Mary High School and Jackson High School consolidated and became Jackson Central Mary. Integration of students began on a small scale in 1966 in Madison County when I was teaching at Northside. Faculties were integrated in the fall of 1969 when I was transferred to East High in elementary during a swap out of black and white teachers. In December of that year, Federal Judge Robert McRae decreed that Madison County had dragged its feet too long, and he issued a ruling that a larger scale integration would take place in March of 1970. East closed as a high school, and the high school students, including seniors due to graduate in May, and I'm talking March, April, May, were placed in Beach Bluff, Northside, and West High schools, where they graduated separate from their longtime schoolmates. Last Friday, the Old Country Store had a Black History Lunch and Learn, and it was, we ate out of shoe boxes because blacks at that time could only go to the back door of restaurants, and they were served in either a shoe box or a paper bag. And so Dr. Logan Hampton presented a program where we talked about the Woolworth sit-ins and all of that, and I was actually a freshman at Union when all that was taking place. And my mother would warn me every day when I left to go to school, now don't go through downtown because, you know, they're having sit-ins and things, and you know, it might be dangerous. Well, you know what I did on my way home. I drove downtown. But anyway, at the lunch, I was sitting with, there were three ladies at my table and then the director of the Salvation Army. And one of the ladies kept looking at me and she said, I think I know you. What's your name? And I told her. And she said, I was a senior at East the year you were there. And she went on to tell something that I had not thought about or heard about. I just always thought it was a terrible thing that those seniors had to go to other schools to graduate. And she told me that one student, one young lady, came to Southside to graduate because kids as far away as Pinson attended East. And then she said, you know, we had already ordered our invitations and paid for them, and we couldn't use them at our new schools. And then she said, I never got my senior ring. We had ordered them, but they never came. And it just made me sad all over again, not only that they had to go somewhere else and graduate, but I said, well, I will tell you, she said, I graduated from Northside because she actually lived in the city, and she couldn't go to the city schools because of her credits and everything. And so Mr. Walker, James Walker, gave her permission to go to Northside, but he said you have to furnish your transportation. Her father worked at Coca-Cola, so he went and talked to them, and they let him come in an hour early so he could leave to take her to school at Northside and then pick her up in the afternoon. And I just thought that was very interesting. And I said, well, I was at your graduation because most of our kids at East went to Northside, and so I chose that at graduation to attend. So I thought, well, maybe that'll make her feel better that I was there. But anyway, so East at that point was paired with Nova Elementary, with Nova housing grades 1 through 3 and East grades 4 through 6. And that was we closed school for 2 weeks and made all of that switching around. From that point on, Madison County schools were considered fully integrated, and I put quotation marks around fully, but remained under the watchful eye of the courts for many years, basically from 1963 until the school system was granted unitary status in 2010, and that was a period of 47 years, and that was all of my teaching career in Jackson-Madison County schools because I retired in 2000 from Jackson-Madison County. Also in 1969, Judge McRae ordered several existing schools closed. Now, when I say the names, I want you to think back to 1959-60 when these schools were built. And that's only 9 to 10 years. Pleasant Plains, St. John's, Greer, Span Rosenwald, and Blair's, in addition to closing East as a high school. Now remember, they're only 9 to 10 years old. Of those schools, East is the only one still being used as a public school. St. John, Greer, and Span Rosenwald fell into ruin, and then Blair was purchased by a church and is still in use. Pleasant Plains School out on Old Humboldt Road is now a part of the Star Center campus. So think of the wasted money that went into that, building the new schools and then not doing what the courts had said to do, and then they're closed and they fall into disrepair. At the same time, at the time of the Jackson-Madison County Sesquicentennial in 1972, Fred Stanley was superintendent of the Jackson school system. There were 12 schools, and then James Walker was superintendent of Madison County with also 12 schools. In 1989, the City of Jackson and County of Madison voted to consolidate the two school systems that had been in existence since 1873. Buddy McMillan became the first superintendent of the Jackson-Madison County consolidated school system, and there were 24 schools at that time. Since the year I started school in the last century, Jackson-Madison County combined has had 13 superintendents, with 6 of those, that's half, over the last 20 years. A lot of turnover. So the city school system had a total of 12 superintendents from their beginning until consolidation, and Madison County has had 27 superintendents in total. In addition to the public schools in Jackson-Madison County, there are several private schools, as well as a large community of homeschool students, and there are about 800 homeschool students, which shocked me when I found that out. In the 1860s, the Dominican sisters began what is now St. Mary's School, which is still in existence, as well as St. Joseph's, a school for black children, which closed in the late 50s to early 60s. It was located approximately where the downtown post office is now. Old Hickory Academy, incorporated in 1970, became the University School of Jackson in 1987. Jackson Christian, 1976. Trinity Christian Academy, 1986. First housed in the Westover School facility. Van Drive Christian Academy in 1999, and Augustine School in 2001. And then Sacred Heart of Jesus and Family Christian School in 2004. And Family Christian School is housed in the former West Junior High building. I ran across some innovative events that are of interest. In 1909, Captain Seymour Menders, who was superintendent of Jackson City Schools, began manual training. That's working with your hands. He also created an ungraded classroom for students who had missed school due to smallpox, scarlet fever, measles, mumps, and whooping cough. And I did not find any information about how they dealt with schooling during the flu of 1918. All that is relevant because of the COVID pandemic and what we've gone through with that. You know, schooling from home, which was not very effective and everything. And you think back years and years ago, how would we have handled that? So Jamie, when you were in my class at Northside, how would we have done school during the pandemic? We don't know. We couldn't have done it virtually, could we? So, and that's of interest because the manual training part, that's coming back because we have more and more vocational programs starting, and we have the Loop program where kids are going out part of the school day and working in industry and getting paid for it even. In 1912, R.E.L. Bynum, who was superintendent of Madison County Schools, added the first vocational subject, agriculture. The Greer Agricultural School for Blacks, that was the name of it, was formed with money from the Jeans Foundation, which was created by Anna Jeans, a Quaker philanthropist, along with Booker T. Washington, who was the black educator. This school was located in Denmark, and when it burned in 1921, it was relocated to Golden School, a Rosenwald school located where West Senior High was located, where I taught for 22 years, and where the Sheriff's Department is now. And you see a picture of that. In the Rosenwald schools, there were about 5 different floor plans that they used. And that was one of my favorite ones because it looks more like a house than it does a school. The Rosenwald schools were built by Julius Rosenwald, who was a philanthropist and president of Sears Roebuck and Booker T. Washington again. And they were state-of-the-art schools for black children built all across the South. By 1928, 1/3 of black children were served by Rosenwald schools. Fisk University is the repository of the records and photographs of these schools, and there are over 5,000 photographs in that collection, and you can actually Google and find some of those. They just won't let you copy all of them, and some of the ones I did. And also, Miss Lucy's here, and she has had a big part in refurbishing the school in Bemis, and it was a Rosenwald school as well. And it's probably the only one left in Madison County, because the rest of them fell into disrepair. In 1916, C.B. Jones, who was superintendent of Jackson City Schools, enforced a rigid vaccination requirement for admission to school, and that requirement still stands. So kids have to be vaccinated to start to school. And then look what we've been through with vaccination, you know, and people, you can't make me get a vaccination and all that. Well, they still have to be vaccinated to start school. So, what's the future of school for Jackson-Madison County? Well, we have a cyber school. Now, that cyber schools are not for me. I can't see sitting at a computer all day, and I know when my grandkids were at my house, when schools were closed down, they got real tired of sitting in front of a computer all day trying to learn, and so we have learning loss. But it is for some kids, it's a good thing, and especially for kids who want to homeschool, and it's just an easy way for that to happen. So we have a cyber school. When the lease is finished, it will be cyber school for grades K through 5, and then the school system purchased the old Circuit City building that Union had used, and it will be the high school. And that's where all the cyber school is right now. So that's going on. We have a high school on a college campus over on Lambeth campus, and they'll be pairing with them for classes and everything. We have early college high school, which is paired with Jackson State, and there will be about 32 kids this spring who will graduate with an associate's degree a couple of weeks before they graduate from high school. And that's exciting because they're ready to move on to college or move on into jobs. We have a new Pope School that's on the horizon. I'd never been in Pope School until I worked in the central office, and I was there from 96 through 2000. And the first time I went into it, I thought, oh my word, this school needs to be replaced. So 30 years ago, they were talking about replacing it, and today we're still talking about replacing Pope School. But there is hope that it will be replaced. One of the things that has helped the school system dramatically is the ESSER money. Now, don't ask me what that stands for, but it's the money that came from the federal government in connection with COVID. Millions of dollars have gone into schools. And so the school system has been able to do things that are on the 5-year list to do. And of course, with government money, because I started having people texting me, oh, with all this money, this is what y'all can do with it. Well, guess what? When the government gives you money, the government tells you what you can spend it for. So they have guidelines. They cannot build new buildings with it, but they can refurbish older buildings. Or they could purchase like the building at Union. And so if you keep up with Facebook and the arguments that go back and forth, people just can't understand, well, if you can spend all this money on this, why can't you build a new Pope School? Because they won't let you with that money, that's why. So that's why people need to know what ESSER money is. So I can't tell you what it stands for, but I can tell you it comes from the government, and there are guidelines to how to spend it. I was also thinking, Lucy, talking about St. Joseph's School, did you know that Miss Price went there to school? She went there through junior high school. Miss Price was our cafeteria manager at West, and then Lucy became manager after Miss Price retired, but she went to school there and just told me interesting stories about that. And taught by the nuns. That might have been why she was so strict with us at West High School. We were scared of her. Because if she thought you got too much food on your plate, she'd take your plate and scrape some of it back off. So you had to be real careful. But love Miss Price. So that ends my history, 200-year history. Does anybody have any questions, or do you want to talk about any of the pictures on the screen? Ask any questions about those, and I'll have to move around so I can see the screen. Anybody have any questions or anything?
You mentioned Blair School. Where was that? It was now a church or something.
It is, what road is that on, Lucy?
Steam Mill Ferry Road.
Steam Mill Ferry Road. Yeah, Steam Mill Ferry Road. And also, there's a cemetery there, and that's where Sonny Boy Williamson is buried, at that church cemetery.
Blair's Chapel Cemetery.
Blair's Chapel Cemetery. That Goodrich School that you saw that was in disrepair, that was somewhere near Gadsden in that area. It was northwest. And then some of the others, you know where they're, basically where they're located by the names of them. But back in 1969, I was a young teacher at Northside, and I had no idea that faculties were being integrated. And I was working at Jackson State Community College in the library that summer, about a part-time job, and I got a call or a notification that Mr. Walker was trying to get in touch with me, and I was to call him, and I was scared to death of Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker was Navy, and he followed the chain of command. And so I called him, and he said, I need to see you in my office. So I said, I can be there, this afternoon. So I went, and he said, I don't know whether you know this or not, but we're integrating faculties. And I did not know that, because back then you didn't have Facebook. You learn everything you need to know to learn on Facebook. And they didn't report stuff in the paper like they do now with schools and everything. And so he said, you are young and you can make the adjustment. And I said, yes, sir, because I was scared of it. I wasn't about to say no, I'm not going to do that. Plus, Northside had built a new building, and I'd already moved my stuff in my new room. And it was going to be air conditioned, And I said, yes, sir. So he said, I'm sending you to East, because they were like doing the swap out and everything. And so I went to East, and in December of that year, that's when the judge said we're going to close it in March. And so I was librarian. So I started boxing books up and doing things, and the other teachers just really got on to me about that. They said, this may not really happen. And I said, yeah, but it may, and if it does, I want to be ready. So I went ahead and boxed books up. Well, the library supervisor told me, she said, go and find boxes. Now, she didn't bring me any. She said, go find some and box the books up and label them West, Beach Bluff, and Northside. She said, now send the best books to Northside. She shouldn't have said that to me, because I did the opposite, and I boxed them up and sent them to West. So then, the next year, I got sent to West. So see, things just work out being a rebel like I was. But anyway, and I will have to say that the best thing that ever could have happened to me was Mr. Walker calling me and saying, I'm sending you to East and then to West, and I was in those predominantly black schools for 23 years, and I'm a better person for it. When I retired in 2000, I really meant to, told myself I was going to write Mr. Walker a thank you note and thank him for sending me to those schools. But being lazy and procrastinating, I didn't do it. So I'm walking through Goldsmiths one day, and they had a shirt sale, and they had these tables in the middle of the aisle filled with shirts, and I was heading toward the shirt sale. And I saw Mr. Walker. And I said to myself, well, there he is, go tell him. And then the devil on the other side said, oh, no, don't do that. He won't care. I turned around and was going to go the opposite direction. Well, the angel said, yeah, no, there he is. Go tell him. Don't leave such a coward. So I turned around, and we did that 2 or 3 times. So then I just went to him. I said, Mr. Walker, I don't know whether you heard or not, but I've retired. He said, yeah, I did hear that. I said, well, I want to thank you for something. And he said, what? And I told him. He said, Kenneth, it's just like I told you in my office that day. You were young, you could do it when others couldn't. He remembered what he said. And see, when I got back to Northside after consolidation, after having been in black schools for 23 years, I wasn't well received. And so some of the same teachers were still there as when I had gone 30 years before. And so one of them came in one day and closed my door, and she said something about the real reason I left Northside. I said, what was it? You know, tell me the real reason. She said, the principal's son didn't like you, and he got his daddy to transfer you. I said, well, that's really weird because I didn't teach the principal's son, so I don't see how that could have happened. So then I thought, now, 30 years, people have been talking about me behind my back. And that made me mad. I really got mad. And you know how mad you get mad, and it just comes up in your throat, you can't even talk? Well, that's where it was. And I had to just calm down a minute before I could say anything else to her. But I couldn't let her know that bothered me because that, so then when I go to the central office, the son is one of the assistant principals, and he came through my office one day, and I said, it was Johnny Reynolds. And I said, Johnny, let me tell you a funny story. And I told him that. He went ballistic, and he was going to go kill that woman. I said, no, you can't go kill her. Don't go kill her. Please don't go kill her. It'll be on me if you kill her. And so anyway, after cursing, and he was going to go kill her, he finally settled down, and he did not kill her, thank goodness. But anyway, but it just bothered me that people had talked about me behind my back, and I was out there having a good time. And still would have stayed at West until I retired, and might still be there if things hadn't changed the way they did. And now they're talking about, with Blue Oval coming, they're going to need a high school out in that area. That just makes me mad to think about it. They closed a good high school, so now we're going to open up. I guess we'll run the sheriff's department now. Any comments or anything? Lucy.
Yeah, I would just like to say, thank you for the presentation. It was, this Professor Newman was an outstanding teacher. He was beyond a teacher. He was just a teacher that cared for the students, staff, everybody. He just made a difference in your life and your feeling. He always remained that same calm spirit, and people were just people. He didn't have no respect for person. So that just said a lot, you know. He seemed to be the same still now, but I enjoyed working with you, and I know many others did at West, and you made a difference.
Thank you. One of the cooks that came later after the older ones retired invited me to her family reunion. Now, if you've never been to a black family reunion, you could miss something because they put on a family reunion now. Now, I've gone to family reunions, and you watch what everybody brings to eat. You don't eat some certain people's food and all this, and leave as soon as you can. Well, that black family reunion was like a whole weekend. And so I was invited on a Saturday night. And, I mean, we're talking, it was at the DoubleTree, and all those rooms were open up. That place was packed. And they had a magician, and they had all kinds of entertainment. They had wonderful food. And so at some point then, they said, okay, each head of each family stand up and introduce your family. And I had taught several of her children. And so when her turn came, you know, she introduced her children, her grandchildren, and all that. And then she said, I want to introduce a special member of my family. It was me. Me. So like Lucy said, it was a special, special place. And so when Kathy called me and kind of picked my month, I said, well, okay, let's do February because it's Black History Month, and then with the bicentennial, because I've been involved with the bicentennial now since last January of 2021, And I was the education chair, and I'm on the bicentennial commission, and so we finished that in August of this August with the grand finale. And I thought, now what am I going to do with myself when the bicentennial's over? Because that's been my job. I've spent more time with it than I have anything else I do, including my work. And so then I get an email from Union yesterday. I'm on a committee for the bicentennial for Union through the next year. So, if you need any bicentennial information, I have it. And now don't get any ideas from Kathy about emailing me stuff to check your comments.